Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 803 of the Juicebox Podcast. On today's episode of the Juicebox Podcast, we'll be speaking with Julia. Julia is the mother of a young child with type 1 diabetes who was diagnosed just before their second birthday. And this conversation covers so much, I can't even list it here. While you're listening today, please remember that nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise, and always consult a physician before making any changes to your healthcare plan or becoming bold with insulin. If you're a U.S. resident who has type 1 diabetes or is the caregiver of someone with type 1, please take a moment to go to t1dexchange.org/juicebox and take the T1D Exchange survey. It's completely HIPAA compliant, absolutely anonymous. All you have to do is just join the registry, take the survey, takes less than 10 minutes. And once you've done that, you've helped people living with type 1 diabetes and moved type 1 diabetes research forward right from your sofa. That's pretty great. You can do a lot without leaving your house in less than 10 minutes at t1dexchange.org/juicebox. All right. Thank you very much for listening to that part. Now let's go to the next part. And welcome to the next part. This episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by the Dexcom G6 continuous glucose monitor, and you may be eligible for a free 10-day trial of the Dexcom G6. Find out more about it at dexcom.com/juicebox. Links in the show notes, links at juiceboxpodcast.com. You want to know who else the podcast is sponsored by? Well, I'm going to tell you. It's sponsored by Omnipod, and they make the Omnipod 5, which is an automated insulin delivery system, and they make the Omnipod DASH, which is an amazing tubeless wireless system, just like the Omnipod 5 is. They're both tubeless and wireless. Omnipod 5, automated, DASH, not automated. You decide which one's right for you, and you may just be eligible for a free 30-day trial of the Omnipod DASH. How do you find this out? I'm glad you asked. Omnipod.com/juicebox. You introduce yourself any way you want to be known, which just really means you don't need to use your last name. If we talk about people in your life, you're free to speak about them, by their name or not, whatever works for you. Just please don't say like Uncle Billy 53 times and then at the end say, I probably shouldn't have mentioned Billy's name.
Yep.
Then I'll bang my head against the desk while I'm editing out Uncle Billy's for you. So that's pretty much it. So when you're ready, go ahead.
Okay. My name's Julia. I am a mom of a diabetic toddler. She is 3 years old and was diagnosed just before the age of 2.
Julia, I don't want to go off track immediately, but are you giving me your gas station voice right now?
Maybe. I have a pretty good receptionist voice from work. I'm not a receptionist, but you kind of get that voice when you answer the phone.
Is that what you call it? We call it a gas station voice here. I've said it on the podcast before because my wife is never as kind as she is to the person who's pumping her gas. So,
the customer service voice. And
that window goes down and my wife's like, oh, hello. Like, who are you? Where's this wonderful person coming from?
I'll get better when I'm not like presenting my name because that gets a whole presentation vibe and that's a whole different voice.
No, this is all staying in the podcast. So, I just, we spoke for a couple of minutes before we started and I thought, that's not what her voice sounds like.
Oh, that's funny.
Anyway, so you're why don't I pay attention to my job here? You're the mom of a child with type 1. You say a toddler?
Yeah. Yep. She's 3.
3. How old was she when she was diagnosed?
It was 10 days before she turned 2.
Okay. Beat me by a couple of weeks there.
Yeah. That actually was one of the things that was a big draw for me with the podcast is like when you have a 2-year-old who's diagnosed, it's like, well, what the heck is their life going to be like? And that was a huge comfort, like just knowing like, hey, your kid's a teenager and she's doing great. And,
well, I'm glad.
That was like really the first big thing that struck me about the podcast.
I would tell her so that she knew, but then she'd look at me and go, or those are your people, not mine, or something. I don't know what she would say. She's morphing as she gets older, where she's like, that's nice. She said to me the other day, I gave her a message from somebody and she said, that's nice. Thank you. And then she walked away. I was like, uh-oh.
Oh, she's becoming pleasant.
Is someone softening? What's happening? So 2 years old, your daughter. Any other kids?
No, she's my first.
Okay. Any since her?
No.
Gotcha.
We haven't got the courage.
Yeah. I 100% know what you mean by that. How about autoimmune or diabetes, anything like that in your family line, husband side, or if you're married, your side?
So yes and no. So we have diabetes in our family on my side, mostly type 2, but I have a grandpa and an uncle who are both on insulin as type 2s.
Mm-hmm.
And you know how that goes. Like they could have just never been tested for type 1. They're on insulin. I don't know.
Well, yeah, they could be insulin dependent type 2s as well, but were they for a long, long time using insulin? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think they've been on it for a long time. And like my one uncle, he's pretty thin. He doesn't fit the type 2 characteristics. You know what I mean? So just the idea that, he's type 1 or type 2 on insulin, it's just kind of a little fishy. But, we're not that close that I've ever really dug into it. Like, are you sure you're type 2?
So now that you're speaking more, you live near a large lake in the north part of the country. Is that correct?
The Midwest, yeah.
Yeah. How could a person live their whole life thinking they had type 2 diabetes and have type 1 and no one say anything?
I don't know, but you hear more now that I'm more involved in the diabetes community. You hear more and more of that, how it kind of goes on for a while, and they're like, "Well, we'll start you on insulin because
does he do
it's
well?
Not working out."
Does he do well or does he struggle?
A lot of lows.
A lot of lows.
Dangerous lows.
Huh. Well, I'll tell you what. I might bet that he's type 2, just based on what you said. I don't know. I don't know why. Just I get a vibe. That's all.
Gotcha.
That's what the podcast is down to now, Julia. I'm just going to sit here, and when people speak and they stop, I'm going to go, I get a vibe that's right.
Gotcha.
I don't know how long that'll be interesting, but that's interesting.
Yeah. And then other than that, I mean, my husband's sister has what I'm told is autoimmune asthma, but I don't know how they know if it's regular asthma or autoimmune asthma, if that was ever tested. And then my mom has a little bit of autoimmune stuff too. So there's autoimmune in the family. And then I had gestational diabetes, which I hear there might be a link to that too. Mm-hmm. I don't know. So, I mean, there's little bit of links there. Like I'm semi-familiar with diabetes, but not really type 1. And right. Yeah.
Okay. Well, interesting. Thank you for setting the table for us and letting us know what's going on. So when your daughter is diagnosed at 2, it's only a year or so ago. Is that right?
Yeah, almost a year and a half.
Do they start you off with, I mean, now that you hear other people's stories, what did you have one of the good experiences where they're like, hey, here's a CGM and pens or a pump, or were they like, take these needles and go suffer until 6 months has passed by? What did they do for you?
I mean, it was kind of a typical experience in terms of what you would expect. We got syringes. I don't know why, but I have no idea how to use a pen. So we started out with syringes and stuck with them, which worked out because she ended up going to diluted insulin where we would have had to do syringes anyway. Mm-hmm. And they didn't start her with the Dexcom at the hospital because she wasn't quite 2 yet. And they said the approval process with insurance will go faster if we just run the paperwork when she turns 2. So we were without a Dexcom for a couple weeks, but that wasn't, a huge deal because her honeymoon hadn't started yet. And we didn't know what we were doing. So she was high all the time anyway, but it was a lot of that don't die advice. Like we didn't get the good advice right off the bat. So,
Julia, what did you mean?
15 carb uncovered snacks type of stuff.
Yeah. So real quick though, what did you mean the honeymoon hadn't started? Did she have a honeymoon?
Oh, yeah. So that's actually why I reached out. I kind of wanted to talk more about that because she has had one heck of a honeymoon. She went off of insulin for a while. She went back on it and it's been kind of spotty since then. And we've just had a lot of honeymoon type experiences. And I thought you know.
That's interesting. No. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And especially since she's so small, like her insulin needs are low anyway.
Hmm.
Like she's just kind of a really interesting case to talk about.
So at 2 years old, how much insulin was she getting a day?
She was getting about a unit right after diagnosis.
Okay. And would you give it to her as basal and nothing else, or were you giving meal insulin?
So we started out with, a couple of units of Lantus and very quickly started to take that down. And she went to a half unit for a while. And she was getting meal insulin, but it was really tricky because, her carb ratio towards the beginning, kind of landed at like 1 to 30. And so if she didn't eat enough, we couldn't give her insulin and they had us dosing afterwards. And it was a mess. So it was one of those like, okay, kid, like at one point, like they said, oh, she has to eat this many carbs to get any insulin. So I made her like a giant bowl of mashed potatoes and she didn't finish it. You know what I mean? Like,
Because
okay, you have to finish this so I can give you some
Julia,
insulin.
because no one wants a giant bowl of mashed potatoes. Is that why?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I like sprinkled ground beef on top and put some tiny little shreds of broccoli on there so it seemed balanced. But I'm like, you're pretty much going to have to eat a bunch of mashed potatoes for this to get done.
Julia, you are from the Midwest. You're like, here, take potatoes. We'll put some beef on the top of it, and let's kill something in the backyard. We'll throw that on there too, and you're gonna love this. It's, listen. First of all, that sucks because because I'm assuming what happened was somebody said to you that this many carbs is the least amount that you need to cover this amount of insulin, which is probably the smallest amount of insulin you can give her.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And if you tried to cheat, would she get low?
Yeah. So as her honeymoon started, it was kind of nuts because, we were, dramatically reducing her doses and whatnot. And we had her on like a half unit of Lantus. And there was one day I sent her to school, like I was going to, try and get her to get this big breakfast down. And I thought, oh, she didn't finish it, so I can't give her the insulin. And so I sent her to school, daycare. It's a nursery school, actually.
Sure.
But I couldn't give her the insulin for breakfast.
Julia, I didn't think she was like a prodigy. I didn't think she was on her way to 10th grade or something like that.
she might be, but that's
lovely.
A whole different thing. But so I sent her to daycare and like, all right, well, she's going to be high. Like, I don't know what to do. And so she spiked to 180 and she just like, did a fall rate alert down and she was just like crashing. And I'm like, okay, well, if she didn't have insulin for this amount of food and she just has her basal on board, that was like finally enough to explain to her like endo team, hey, this insulin is way too much for this child. Mm-hmm. Like, because I had talked to them before about, I think her Lantus is too much for them. Like what? And they're like, no, you can't take her off the Lantus. She'll go into DKA.
Right.
Like,
you're like, I think this kid's making her own insulin here. So
yeah. And like, that was finally enough for them to say, oh yeah, we have to take her off of insulin because if that was just with the Lantus, yeah. So she went off of insulin for like 2 months after that. And it was amazing. And I feel like we should have took more advantage of it, but
more advantage of it by like going out to dinner and things like that.
Yeah, that kind of stuff. And, actually maybe getting a babysitter, because if you don't have to worry so much.
Actually, it's like, I should have gone out, Scott. That's what I'm saying. I should have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I should have, exactly. But like I had a newly diagnosed diabetic child, like I wasn't going anywhere.
That's very interesting. And that's a lot of insight too. I should have just taken some free time when it was there. So yeah. 2 full months without insulin at all.
Yeah.
And was she wearing the CGM still?
Yep.
Okay. And what did you see?
So it was kind of fascinating. So she would, spike up at meals. She would get, maybe 180 at the high end. And we weren't eating very high carb, but we're not a high carb family anyway. My husband does keto. Since I had gestational diabetes, I don't eat a ton of carbs anyway. So, she was eating pretty balanced meals, but she wouldn't get that high. And then actually the interesting thing is before meals, if she was starting to get hangry, her blood sugar would crash to like 55 when I was getting food ready.
Yeah. So
it was
taking no man-made insulin, but wearing a CGM. So you could see her blood sugar getting low as the meal approached. So she knew dinner was being made?
Yeah, it's something. I mean, I don't know, but she was hangry about it. Like she was like, give me my damn food.
You know, Jenny told me one time that the body in a person who doesn't have diabetes, as it anticipates, God, I hope I'm remembering this right, that you're going to eat, that it starts to lower your blood sugar a little bit.
Huh.
Like
you wouldn't think it would lower it to 55, but yeah.
Definitely wouldn't think that. But I also know people who get low blood sugars and, you know, I mean, that's some sort of dysregulation of their insulin, you know, people who don't have diabetes, I mean, who get, let's just say unpleasant when they're hungry, you know, like how's that? Is that a nice way of saying it?
Right.
I mean, people get nasty. Like I'll tell you that for years is a standing rule in this house. My son does not like to have food in his stomach when he's playing baseball. So when the baseball game ends, you don't really talk to Cole until Cole eats. Like, he's singularly focused, sort of like a lion. You know what I mean? Like he needs to eat when he's done.
Sure.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. So, scary, comforting, sad. What's it feel like when someone tells you that your kid needs insulin, she has type 1 diabetes, and then all of a sudden it goes away for an extended amount of time? Did every day just feel like this is probably the last day, or were you happy about it? I'm trying to...
So I was really relieved that she was going off of insulin, but honestly, it took her endo some talking me into it because her nurses had me so scared about going off of the Lantus, you know?
DKA, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And it's like, okay, that's a valid point, except if you realize like that I'm giving my kid 2 juice boxes overnight to keep her numbers, you know, between 80 and 110, you know, and I'm basically spending my entire night juicing my kid, like there's something wrong here. Like she doesn't need that. So once, I mean, the doctor and I really talked about it, I felt okay. And then it was a huge relief because like even at daycare, when she would like have breakfast and, you know, she would be dosed right after breakfast there and she would go outside and play, like she would just be fall rate alert the entire time. And she dropped by like 40 in one reading. And it was terrifying. Yeah. So, I mean, it was a massive relief to be going off of insulin.
Yeah. Or at least for things to regulate a little bit, right? Like just to, like, I mean, now that she's back on insulin now, is that right? The Omnipod 5 automated insulin delivery system is here. It is the only tubeless automated insulin delivery system that integrates with the Dexcom G6, and it uses Smart Adjust technology to automatically adjust your insulin delivery every 5 minutes to help protect you from highs and lows. And of course, as a bonus, no multiple daily injections with Omnipod. Omnipod is this little device. It's small. And you fill it with insulin and put it on, and then tubelessly and wirelessly, it delivers insulin to you. Now, if you have the Omnipod 5, this automation is amazing. Using your Dexcom G6 data, the Omnipod 5, it says to itself, I don't know exactly how it says it, this is not technical. I mean, not that I think you believe that the pump is just saying, like talking like a person, but all right, anyway, what I'm getting at is it sees your blood sugar going up, it tries to stop it. It sees your blood sugar going down, it tries to stop it. It's trying to keep you in a range. That's amazing and something you should be looking into. Omnipod.com/juicebox. Here's the really cool thing about Omnipod 5. It's not a durable medical device. And so that means the Omnipod 5 is available through your pharmacy, which moreover means that you can start with it right away. No 4-year durable medical equipment contract like with some of those other insulin pumps. And this is even if you're currently in warranty on a different system. You just should give it a try. Omnipod.com/juicebox. Now, for full safety, risk information, and free trial terms and conditions, you can also go to omnipod.com/juicebox. But Scott, you say you didn't mention a free trial. Well, that's because I was talking about the Omnipod 5. But now that I'm going to come over here and talk about Omnipod DASH, did you know you may be eligible for a free 30-day trial of the Omnipod DASH? That's the truth. You should head over and check it out at the website, omnipod.com/juicebox. So whether you want the Omnipod 5 and that automation, or you're just looking for tubeless and wireless with the Omnipod DASH, Omnipod has something for you. Before we get back to the program is what my grandmother would have said. When she was watching television, she'd say, I'm watching my programs. So anyway, next time you make fun of how I talk, just remember, I'm a product of my upbringing. But before we get back to the podcast, let me tell you about the Dexcom G6. Now, I'm going to go right to the website, dexcom.com/juicebox. When you get there, here's what you're going to see. There's a little bit of text at the top that says, make knowledge your superpower with the Dexcom G6 CGM. That's how you'll know you're in the right place. Now, if you know you want the Dexcom right now, you don't want to mess around on the site, click on the Get Started with Dexcom G6 button right away. It's green. You'll be able to see it. Don't you worry. If you want to know more, then maybe you bounce around the site a little bit. Find out about how you can get readings right on your smart device, like an iPhone or Android. How you can customize your alerts and alarms. Read more about zero finger sticks. Or just listen to this and then go get a Dexcom. Right now, Arden is home from college. She has a sinus infection. It is vicious. She needs a lot more insulin than she's needed in the past. And we've been comfortable giving it to her because we can see her blood sugar in real time. This has been going on for days, but guess what just happened about an hour ago? Arden's fever broke and her blood sugar started to fall. So we were able to jump into action, remove all that extra insulin, stop the fall with a little bit of juice, and level her blood sugar out. I'm looking at it right now. That's 76. You go ahead and try to do that without a Dexcom. It ain't easy. Dexcom.com/juicebox. You may be eligible for a free 10-day trial of the Dexcom G6. Do yourself a favor and go find out at my link.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. She was only off for a couple months, and it didn't take long after she was off of fast acting to go, or after she needed her fast acting again, for her to need Lantus again too. Mm-hmm. So she kind of pretty quickly, over the course of a couple weeks, went fully back on insulin.
How much did she weigh when you found yourself up at night feeding Basil?
She was about 30 pounds.
30, wow. Okay, yeah, that's not nearly as small. I mean, don't get me wrong, that's very small. But it's not as small as I was imagining. So
No. Yeah. Midwest babies are bigger babies.
Well, when you're sprinkling ground beef on top of your roots, you have to expect a little more.
Yeah.
Midwest babies are big babies. Are they all?
They are.
Do you ever see a baby that's a little smaller and think, oh, there's something wrong with it? They don't give it ground beef.
So I guess, this was something my OB told me, is that, the national average baby is like something like 6.5 to 7.5 pounds or something. But the average baby in our area is more like 8+ pounds.
Do you think that's because of the deep fried Oreo cookies at the fair? Or
I mean, maybe. We do eat a lot of cheese curds.
Do you listen to this podcast with any frequency?
Yeah, a lot of them, yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm wondering if I've ever told anybody about the time my sister-in-law came from Wisconsin at the holidays and brought what she called caramel corn, except I do think I told this, except it wasn't popcorn covered in caramel. It was like those, I don't even know how to explain them.
Is it puffcorn?
Yeah, like the... And it was this, I don't even know how to put it, like in your potato chip aisle, there are these things that they call like popcorn, but they're really more like styrofoam peanuts, if I'm being honest, right? Like in consistency. And she had somehow soaked those in a sugar substance and then put caramel over top of them. And when one went into your mouth, your teeth hurt. And my brain felt like it was going to explode. And she's like, oh, I make this with my mom at the holidays. Like it was a tradition for her. And I pulled my brother aside. And I was like, yo, man, she's trying to kill you. I was like,
my grandma makes those too. They're good. But yeah, that's a lot of sugar.
I was like, I don't think that's food, Brian. Don't eat that. And so anyway, that was something I'd never seen in my entire life. So,
oh, wow.
Like,
even just your description of puffcorn is kind of just
like packing peanuts. Yeah, packing peanuts. That's what they seem like to me.
Yeah, no, that's accurate.
Okay. So I'm saying you shouldn't be able to describe food as packing peanuts.
Yeah, that's valid.
Also, in a world of Amazon, do people even know what packing peanuts are anymore? You know what I mean? Now everybody just gets a little like air pocket or something in their bag. I don't know. Now
That's true. It's been a while.
yeah, Julia. Now we're getting into shipping, and I think that's too far off the topic. So, well, when did you have to start diluting insulin?
So we had started that right before she went off of insulin, because they tried that first. And apparently, like, we go to a good size clinic, but she's like one of two patients that they've had that had diluted insulin. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But yeah, she started that right before, and that was U10. And they did it straight at the pharmacy. So they did a mail order pharmacy thing for us and just shipped it to us. So we didn't actually dilute it ourselves, which I hear some people do.
Yeah, like Dr. Frankenstein. They're just working at their kitchen table. But you got it. Okay, so how does that work? Julia, I am so scared to talk about this because every time I see diluted insulin spoken about, people there are two forms of understanding about it, how it works, and nobody's ever certain. So do you know what I mean by that? Like 1 unit equals.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So U10 is 10% the strength of U100. So it's like 10 parts insulin is what the like compound is. It's, 10 parts insulin, 90 parts the compounding, whatever it is.
That liquid. So basically you're diluting the insulin so that it's measurable. Because it's difficult to measure insulin, right? So when at tiny amounts, so you can draw a unit, and you were really getting a tenth of a unit of strength, but a unit worth of liquid.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's really nice because, if you don't have a pump, you can do, half unit. So you can get a 0.05 increment. Mm-hmm. So like if we were bumping and nudging her, we'd do a lot of 0.05 units for her.
So if you need, ready, here we go. If you needed 0.05 for her, how much actual diluted insulin, like how much?
A half unit.
A half a unit of liquid was actually 0.05 of insulin. Okay, so a full unit is, of course, 1 to 10, so you get 0.1. So if you needed a real unit of insulin and you were using diluted, you actually had to use 10 units of liquid?
Yes.
Okay. Did that I'm assuming never happened with her at that size, right?
So there was a point when she needed about, like, if she was sick or something, I would give her 8 units, so it'd be like 0.8. And diluted insulin has to be refrigerated. Mm-hmm. So we're injecting 8 units of cold insulin. So that would really hurt. So that was really unfortunate. And that was actually the reason why, like, as her insulin needs went up, we started to push to get a pump because we needed to do something different because, she doesn't mind the pokes, but poking with larger amounts of cold insulin, that hurts.
Yeah. The big boluses and then it's cold on top of that. So this is the moment where if you're listening and you don't understand, you should say to yourself, my 5th grade teacher let me down, because I see these conversations. They happen about twice a year in the Facebook group where someone wants to talk about diluted insulin and people get so confused. I mean, really? and the conversations happen exactly the same way. I've watched them a half a dozen times in my life. It starts with someone saying, oh, we were using U100, which is like basically like your standard strength insulin, right? Like one to one. But now we're using diluted. So when my kid needs a half a unit, I actually inject this much. And unit, it just fries people's minds. And then when they try to explain it, it goes off the rails. Just it's masterful how bad it gets. The conversations just devolve, and then somebody thinks you're going to hurt somebody, and then the panic sets in. It's amazing every time, Julia.
And it's always kind of a confusing thing when we update her charts at her endo appointments because they always log it in U100. So I'm sitting here like, okay, how do you want me to tell you this? And it's like, okay, she's having a 1-to-5 ratio. So it's 1 to 50 on your charts, and it just makes for confusing conversation. Yeah. It's ridiculous.
It's the interesting thing is that you don't think of, most people don't think of insulin as being in volume, measured in volume, although a unit is a volume of measurement, right? Volume is how we measure liquids. We think of a unit as power for some reason because we,
oh, sure.
Right. 1 unit per 10 carbs, that it's power. It's, I ate 10 carbs. I need a unit of power from this insulin. And so when you start talking about it in volume, but in the same breath, thinking about it also in power, which is, if you're using, what'd you say, U10?
Yeah.
So you're getting 0.1 per unit. So for volume, you're getting a unit of liquid, but for power, you're getting 0.1 or a tenth of that. And that is just when it goes off the rails in conversation for some people.
Well, and the other thing is they tell you with diluted insulin to roll the vial a few times before each time to make sure that it's properly mixed. Mm-hmm. So you don't know 100% that you're getting that perfect dilution either with each draw.
Still a little bit of a crapshoot.
A little bit, but we never really saw issues from the inconsistency. So I don't know if the rolling it was just like an old school precaution. I don't know if it actually becomes like a homogeneous mixture or not.
Mm-hmm. Well,
I don't know. It's weird.
How long did you do it for?
Well, she still actually gets the diluted insulin, like as a backup for her pods, because we can't give her that big of doses generally anyway still. But we did diluted insulin for a year. Almost a year. So
let's talk about that for a second. At her current age, what does she weigh now?
She's nearing 40 pounds. She's maybe 39, 40-ish.
So do you think she's still honeymooning to some degree?
I'm kind of back and forth on that. It's hard to say because her basal rates some days goes down to 0.05 an hour. But when she first started on her pump, she was at 0.05 every other hour.
What pump are you using?
Omnipod.
Are you going to try Omnipod 5?
Yes, but I'm a little hesitant if she's ready for it yet because her basal needs are so low that I worry about those algorithm pumps, being able to give more, but not being able to take enough away.
Well, it could. Ooh, all right. So I don't know for sure. I mean, Loop can take you down to 0. So I would imagine. And
I think Omnipod 5 probably can because Dash could.
I would think so. Yeah, I don't think that would be your concern. I mean, as a matter of fact, I can't say for 100% certainty, but as I sit here and apply my common sense to it, there's no way that any of these algorithms can't completely shut off insulin. They have to be able to do that.
Well, right, they can, but okay, if you're getting 0.05 an hour, like sometimes it might be 55 minutes before you're taking away that 0.05.
I see what you're saying.
Because it's once an hour.
But wouldn't the algorithm be able to see that far into the future to know that? I think it would be able to. Interesting.
I think it depends on how fast of a drop. But I mean, at a certain point, you're doing juice anyway. I don't know.
Does she still fall very quickly?
She's getting to be much more stable. I mean, she's not super stable. Like she's usually kind of drifting down most of the time. Mm-hmm. But it's not like rapid, crazy drops usually, unless I was getting a little heavy-handed.
Right. The entire time you're talking, I feel like we're in the movie Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, and we're at the bus station, and I'm eating John Candy for the first time.
Is it my accent?
Yes, your accent is terrific.
A lot of people say I sound Canadian. If I ever go to the East Coast, everyone, accuses me of that, which is funny because I've had people around here ask if I was from the East Coast, but my dad was in the military. So when I was learning to talk, I lived in Virginia. So every once in a blue moon, you'll catch a little bit of twang or something going on.
Yeah.
But
let me say this. It's blended. And Julia, anyone who would say Canada is not a connoisseur of people's accents. No, there's no.
Sure.
I don't get Canada. I get Chicago more towards Wisconsin is what I get.
You are right in there.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Uh-huh.
I love this podcast. I get to do so much, I get to do so many fun things that I don't think anyone else thinks is fun but me. But I love listening. I can hear, I don't know, I just feel like we're in the bus station. I'm the mom from Home Alone and or something. I don't know what's going on exactly. I have a lot of pictures in my head right now. But I'm having a good time. So can I ask, when insulin needs are this specific and dangerous, I mean, honestly, if you use too much.
Right. Yeah.
Is it just you who takes care of it? Or, I mean, you haven't said. You're married though, right?
I am.
Yeah.
So my husband, he does like short spurts of taking care of her. Like if I need to run to the store or something, like he can keep her stable and safe. But in terms of like giving her insulin, he usually like checks with me first.
Okay.
And, you know, checks like carbs and whatever else. But like at daycare, it's kind of a weird situation. So when we started back to daycare, because she had already been going there, they were going to be trained on doing the insulin injections. But then they discovered how sensitive she was, and they thought, oh, this is a giant liability for us. And like nobody was comfortable with giving her insulin, which, you know, in hindsight, I completely understand. But at that point, I'm like, okay, you know, ADA guys, you know, like you have to accommodate my baby. But, and, you know, like the owners, the husband is diabetic too. He's type 1. So like they have all the compassion in the world for type 1s. But, you know, that whole idea of, ooh, we might kill this kid, you know, was pretty real. So I started doing it myself. Like, so she would have uncovered snacks morning and afternoon, and I would dose her on lunch. But it was a lot easier because we live like 4 blocks away from the daycare, and I was working from home because of COVID. So it was really convenient. Like I could be there really fast. So, I mean, I handle pretty much all of her insulin needs for the most part, but then other people are trained on like the safety aspects of, okay, if she needs a finger prick.
Right.
But daycare's thing is they also get really busy. Like, you know, it's 2 teachers, 12 kids, and there's a lot going on. So most of the time, if she's starting to go low, you know, they kind of bump and nudge her a little bit. Like they'll give her, you know, like one tiny little cookie, like an animal cracker size thing, to keep her from going low. But if she's looking like she's actually going to go low, I go over there.
Okay. How old are you, Julia?
I am 34.
Okay. Because it's your story. I mean, you could be anywhere from, you know what I mean, your early 20s, like your first kid, to, you know, to older, but your voice, because of the Midwest thing, like if you told me you were 53, I'd be like, okay, I believe you. So I knew you weren't, so I couldn't nail it down. So I'm like, I gotta ask. So okay.
You're going to make me a little self-conscious here. No, we kind of got started late with having kids, because we had some fertility issues, and then so it took us a while to have her, and then, you know, she ended up having a lot of issues. And
No, I completely understand. It's not, and by the way, I don't mean like you sound like my grandmother. I'm not saying.
Well, that's a relief.
I'm just saying that like there's something about this specific accent. It stops you from dating somebody as well. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know how am I going to put this? Like, there are blonde girls in New Jersey who are 27, and I can tell they're 27 when they speak 3 words. But you're like, you have like a more mature cadence. Is that what I mean? I think so.
Well, yeah. So there's that. I mean, I'm an older mom. I'm also an architect, and, you know, so there's a lot of, you know, professional stuff going on, and just like
speaking a more measured
life
way.
experience.
You guys one day I'll record one of my like a business meeting I have with an advertiser or something like that, and you'll be stunned that I'm not any different in like my professional life than I am when I'm making this podcast. As a matter of fact, when companies reach out, one of the first things I say to them, like US Med is a sponsor now, and I'm on a phone call early on when they're interested in being advertisers, and I said, look, just you need to know right now, this is me. I have no ability not to be the person you're talking to right now. So if you need somebody to like shine this up for a meeting, or I'm like, we should probably skip it because I can't do that. I was like, I am only this person. So I have no like professional veil that I can throw over myself. My wife is always like telling me, you would get fired at my job in like 3 minutes. And I'm like, no, I wouldn't. They would love me. And she's like, you would get fired.
You know, I wonder if how much of that is the nature of your job not being in like a corporate environment too.
I just don't care. But I think that's part of it. Like here, an interesting story would be, by the time this comes out, Okay, so Julia, if you just don't say this out loud, we'll be okay. Is going to be a sponsor of the podcast pretty soon, a couple weeks.
Nice.
And I had to get on. It's like owns, and they're a very like it's a very professional company. You know what I mean? Like they're just it's a professional setup when you're dealing with people. And I had to get onto a call with like 4 or 5 people, and I was getting a little pep talk from a friend of mine who used to work at but doesn't work there anymore. And I was just chatting back and forth with her, and I was like, I've got this meeting coming up. It seems like a real adult meeting. And she goes, "Don't curse." And I'm like, I won't. She goes, "No, Scott, you will." And I was like, "What?" She goes, "You curse in every meeting I've ever been in with you." And she's like, "It's delightful and nobody cares." She's like, "But they're new and this isn't the setting." And I was like, "Okay." So like an hour later, I get a text from my friend. She goes, "How did it go?" I said, "Oh, it went great. They're going to buy ads." I only said fuck twice.
Oh my.
And she's like, "How did that happen?" I was like, "I don't know. It just, the word really fit in the situation."
You're building rapport, Scott.
Yeah, I know, but I do it right on the razor's edge. Like even my wife's like, "Could you start with like shit or something first?" I'm like, "No." I was like, "It's not important." Anyway, it goes back to I think when I was like 20 years old, I was sitting in a diner with my friends, like at 2:00 in the morning. We're having one of those like, conversations we thought were existential for our like 20s. And I just came off and said, like, "I think you can say anything to anyone if you say it correctly." And they were like, "No, that's not right." And one kid like put $20 on the table and then said the most like abhorrent word he could think of. And he said, "Work that word into a conversation with the waitress without her getting upset, and I'll give you $20. And it didn't go well, Julia. I'm not going to lie. It went really poorly. I did not think it through as nearly. I thought my delightfulness would buoy the situation, but it wasn't quite enough. And as he pulled the 20 back, I said, "Give me 2 more chances." I was like, give me a best out of 3. And I did work it out eventually. We actually, on the 3rd try at a different restaurant, at a different time, I found a way to slip a word in that just shouldn't be in polite conversation. And the person rolled with it. And it wasn't just because I know people are like, "Well, they're waitresses. They smile at everything. They don't want you to be upset. They're trying to get tips." Trust me.
Right.
It worked. And since then, I like to say that I could tell you that your dog died and that I killed it. And when it was over, you would thank me. Like that is like, I'm good at that. Like that, like, and it's not a thing you do. It's just it's a way of being, I guess. So anyway, yeah, I said twice in that meeting with the people from which I'm sure they're not thrilled that I'm saying right now. But anyway,
that's funny.
Yeah, we're gonna sell. It'll be fine.
Nice. Those did seem really nice. I was kind of bummed I wasn't offered one. Like, you guys are giving me syringes, but then when we got to the diluted, it's like, yeah, okay, it's a good thing I know how to use syringes.
Do you know I've never used an insulin pen in my life?
Really?
Never. Not once.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Huh.
Arden went from syringes right to an Omnipod.
Wow.
Yeah, I used syringes for 2 years old, 3 years old. Part of the time she was 4 years old. We got her onto an Omnipod before kindergarten started because I didn't want her to because back then, here was my thought process. I didn't want somebody I didn't know sticking her with a needle.
Oh, yeah.
It was the entire reason I got a pump. That was it.
Gotcha.
So
was Arden good with the pokes?
Oh, you know what? I never thought she loved them. Like, don't get me wrong. When she was real little, 2 years, she'd run. Like
sure.
she'd see the needle. She'd get a big smile on her face and turn around and run away. It wasn't much of a chase as she was 2 years old and her legs were very short, but she still put an honest effort into it to get away. Sure. I've had to like hold her once or twice to give her one, but for the most part, she was okay with it. The thing that I remember, I guess, most strongly from that time is that I was always so worried that this would just be some terrible thing that was happening to her that she'd never forget and it would just scar her. And,
sure.
And I know I've told this before, so just in a couple of sentences, after Arden switched to Omnipod, we just didn't have any problems with the Omnipod, like for the longest time. And years later, I had to give her like a clearing shot of insulin. Like I needed to give her an injection. And I pulled it out and like was filling it up, and she goes, "What is that?" And I said, "It's a needle." And she goes, "For what?" And I said, "I like, I got to give you some insulin with it." She goes, "No, no, no, no. Hold on a second." And then, and then literally as we're talking about it, I come to realize I probably stuck Arden 10,000 times as an infant, like, as a toddler. And just a couple of years after she stopped getting injections, she had no recollection of needles whatsoever.
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy, isn't it?
It blew my mind. Like, really genuinely did.
What really gets to me is Cora, she got pretty desensitized to the needles pretty fast. And like on bad days, I might give her 10 little minor adjustments throughout the course of the day. So, that's 10 different pokes. And, at a certain point, she got to the point where I'm like, it was time to eat. And she would say, "Mama, you didn't give me my insulin." I'm like, dude, I gave it to you like 5 minutes ago. Like, that's how little she was starting to care about them. It was kind of crazy.
Didn't even remember. Yeah. Just a couple minutes later.
Yeah. And I mean, now that she's been on the pod for a couple months, if I try and give her an injection, she kind of gets mad, like, "I don't want a poke." But then, I give it to her and she doesn't make a fuss about it. Like, it doesn't really hurt her, but it just,
Yeah. Kelly has a t-shirt that says that.
What?
"I don't want to poke." Julie,
okay.
On, Julie, that was the most Midwestern pregnant pause ever, Julie. She's like, "I don't understand. Where's the sexual innuendo going? It doesn't." You are so lovely. Thank you for coming on.
I wasn't totally confident if that was an innuendo or not. I was like, I'm not quite sure.
Why would her wait? The wife doesn't have diabetes. I don't understand. No, she actually has a sign. It's on the side of the bed. It's
Oh yeah, that seems more appropriate. From what I've heard about your wife, she doesn't seem like the someone to wear innuendo t-shirts.
She's not a t-shirt slogan kind of person. No,
no,
I love
so
that. That's where your brain jumped to. That's great. She wouldn't wear a shirt like that. Hold on a second. While Arden, can I just text Arden very quickly? I'm recording. Can we talk about this in 30 minutes? Here's the text. So Arden is eliminating gluten for a month.
Oh.
She's almost done. The honest truth is, I don't know if it's helping her or not. We're having trouble telling. So I guess maybe if you're having trouble telling, maybe it's not helping. I'm not sure. But I get this text.
Right.
"I want 5 guys." Next text. "Oh, wait, I can't." I said, "No, you can. Just no roll." She goes, "If there's no roll, then I can't." Also, I can't have a milkshake because she gets cookies in the milkshake.
Five Guys has a gluten-free bun, I'm told.
Hold on. Person I'm recording with says Five Guys has gluten-free buns. All right. Talk soon.
I mean, I'm not 100% confident in that, but I'm like 90%.
We'll find out. Also, this is what this text is really an indication of, and any of you ladies of a certain age will know, is that today is the first day of Arden's period. And she's sitting in school going, I would like to get French fries.
She's planning her food in advance.
Yeah. This is exactly what's going on. Text it back.
So that is actually a good segue for the last thing I need to talk about. So we kind of talked about the first half of our honeymoon, and the second half got just kind of weird. She was diagnosed with celiac in November, and the reactions with that in her honeymoon were nuts.
Tell me about it, because I didn't know this. Was this not in your notes?
It was not, because I sent that out, and then I don't know, 2 weeks later, we ended up with the celiac stuff.
No kidding. Okay, do tell. How long? Again, oddest podcast ever. You're like, "Oh, my kid has celiac," and I'm like, "Oh, intrigue." Tell me more.
I was wondering how we were going to segue that because I didn't want to miss out. So she, after diagnosis, we were eating lower carb stuff, so a lot more berries in their diet and whatnot. And she had just had the celiac screening at diagnosis. So looser stools, I wasn't really worried about. I'm like, okay, well, it's a little bit looser, but it's not crazy. And it just like never like re-solidified totally, which I know kind of gross to talk about, but
no, what are you talking about, Julia? That's fine.
well, I have a toddler. Poop is a big part of my life. And then so it got worse like this fall. And then I was starting to worry about celiacs because I know that was kind of a big relationship with type 1. But then she was having this thing where at night before bed, like she would always ask for snacks, and I would give her a small snack thinking, okay, like this is about how much I can get away without completely screwing up your blood sugar for the night. And she was just whining about being hungry. And so one night I'm like, all right, well, I'm just going to feed you literally everything you want here. So basically fed her the kitchen, and she's still saying, I'm hungry. And I'm like, you can't possibly be hungry. It turns out she was getting tummy aches and she was mistaking them for hunger.
Oh, you're so like, here, this will fix it. More food.
Yeah. So she's, pouring food on her tummy ache, hoping that'll help. And obviously it didn't. And like she was having pretty bad GI upsets were starting too. And, after I realized that she was having tummy aches, it's like, okay, so we got her in for the blood work. It was elevated, but not elevated enough that they were confident just calling her celiacs without the scope. So she got a scope. There was evidence of the celiacs in the scope, like visually, like they could see the villi were worn down. And then also, it came back positive. So she got the celiacs diagnosis, and it came to realize that part of the issues that she was having, she would eat, she would spike high, and then she would crash back down. And I'm like, okay, is this a basal issue? Is her basal still way too much for her? But she's on like a half Lantus at the time. So I'm like, well, I can't really do anything about that. So basically I was giving her just enough insulin to keep her under 200. And then I was catching the drop because like, what else do I do? Like, do I let her go to 300 so that she'll level out at 100 later? That doesn't make sense to me. So obviously not medical advice here, and I wouldn't advise people do that or take that approach. But it turns out basically what was happening with the celiacs is her intestines weren't absorbing her food. So as soon as her food would start leaving her stomach and going into her small intestine, like absorption would totally stop. And so she'd go from having, all sorts of carb input and whatnot, and then her food just wouldn't absorb anymore. So she would completely crash. So after the celiac diagnosis, we took out gluten from her diet, obviously, and like her insulin needs started dropping like considerably. And so to the point where for a few day stretches, she would actually like stop needing fast acting altogether. And she was still on Lantus at this point. So, like we couldn't take that away easily. So there was still some feeding of the insulin, but like there was like for a week, she would have a few days where she would need insulin, and then she would completely not need insulin at all for like 3 days. And then her insulin needs would come back, but they would come back higher because like her pancreas would be like, hey dude, I give up. And then, she'd kind of start tapering back down on her insulin needs again. And then it would go back up. But during all of this, like her pancreas is kicking in. We're getting ready for her Omnipod start. And it's like they were already hesitant to give her an Omnipod because her insulin needs were so low. And, there are minimums for pods.
Right.
And their practice by standard won't do diluted insulin in a pump because that's not like a best practices type thing.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was starting to freak out and like, we're starting a pump next week and she doesn't need insulin this week. Like, is she going to be able to start her pod? And her endo was really comforting. She's like, no. Like, this is probably like the inflammation in her body going away. And it's like lowering her insulin needs. And then her honeymoon's coming back a little, but her insulin needs will go back up as she starts to digest her food better. And her endo was like 100% right about that because her insulin needs started to go up considerably. And so we started the pump and she was on like 0.05 alternating for her basal. So barely anything. And like pretty rapidly, like you could tell like her food started digesting better again. And like she got so much more stable. Like we could give her insulin and she wouldn't crash later. So it was like this whole magical thing, but it was just kind of nuts to figure out.
How long did it take for the inflammation to die down and for you to find some stability?
So the crashing part where the inflammation died down was a couple weeks. And then it was only about like maybe 3 weeks after that that her insulin needs started to come back up and staying up, where like you could see that like she was starting to heal.
It's very interesting. It's incredible. Yeah. Hey, earlier, did you misspeak or did you mean to say stummy? Because Arden
What did I say?
You said stummy instead of tummy. You started to say stomach, then you said... But Arden says that, though. She says her and her girlfriends, they say my stomach hurts.
No, I totally meant to say tummy, but I started saying stomach.
Well,
and, yeah.
You can use it if you want. The girls love it here. So...
No, yeah, I'm just talking too fast.
No, that's okay. Stummy. You made me feel at home. I was like, oh, I hear that. I hear that all the time.
I'm glad I could make you comfortable.
It's very nice. Well, that's incredible. So,
yeah.
Are you all like gluten-free in the house now or just her?
So we're mostly gluten-free. Like we de-glutened our kitchen. Like we cleaned everything top to bottom. Like, silverware drawers are like big crumb catchers apparently. So like we did all that kind of stuff and got rid of everything, like cleaned the kitchen like head to toe. And so it's like de-glutened, but I do keep some gluten-y stuff on hand for like my lunches and stuff that like won't get crumbs everywhere. Like I have some like tomato soups that are microwavable and some like microwave thingies and stuff that we wouldn't give to her by mistake. But for the most part, our house is gluten-free and our meals around her are gluten-free.
Any benefit for you or your husband?
So for me, it's kind of backwards because I've had like a really weird journey with food, like with having the gestational diabetes diagnosis, like feeling like I can't eat after that because, you're going to get type 2. So I was just kind of recovering from that type of approach. And then she gets a celiac thing and I basically feel like I can't eat around her. So when I'm not around her, I have way too many snacks because I feel like later I can't, like, what am I going to eat? Oh, I'm going to have an apple later. Yay.
Would you consider what's happening to you an eating disorder or just?
I think I'm just kind of struggling a little bit. I don't know. Maybe.
Okay.
It really messed with my head when I had gestational and the educator told me that I had an 80% chance of developing type 2 within 10 years. So then, and I was also breastfeeding at the time, like right after that. So here I was trying to eat super, super healthy and I was breastfeeding. So, and dairy free because Cora can't have dairy. So it was like this whole thing, like I couldn't get enough carbs in my body. So I was just like shedding the pounds like crazy. And I wasn't a huge person to begin with. And I had to lose weight to get pregnant. Because I had PCOS. So it's like I had already lost weight to get pregnant. And then, I had the baby and the baby weight came off easily. And then I was breastfeeding and it was a whole big thing. So me trying to ward off type 2 was like borderline eating disorder. But I was eating and I was eating really healthy. But for the amount that my body needed, it just wasn't enough.
Julie, there's the doctors think that PCOS might be autoimmune.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's fascinating and upsetting.
Sorry, I didn't want to be the one to tell you. You're like, this is definitely my husband's grandmother's fault. Right. Yeah. Can you talk about that for a second? I know that's a left turn for you, but when did you realize you had PCOS and how do you manage it?
So my husband and I were trying to have a baby right after we got married and my periods were starting to get really irregular. And I had struggled with my weight for a while. Like I wasn't big, but I could not lose weight. Like exercise and eating reasonably did nothing. Like I would lose like maybe a pound a month, which is just kind of a frustrating thing and makes it really hard to keep up with the diet.
Yeah.
So that was kind of tough. And so, I'd go on these spurts where I'd lose weight and I'd gain weight. And then what I ended up doing to be able to get pregnant and like regularize my period is I did the keto diet for about a year. And, I had a couple of miscarriages when we were trying, which is a risk with PCOS too. Mm-hmm. But yeah, the keto diet got me to a point where my periods were regular enough that I could get pregnant and stay pregnant. And then I had Cora, and it seemed like the pregnancy, first off, like negated the effects of going off of the keto diet somehow miraculously. Because if you go off of a keto diet and start eating carbs again, like you just pack on the pounds. Well, the pregnancy kept me from doing that somehow. And then it was just kind of a whole reset button. And like my PCOS seemed to like pretty much go away after I had Cora. Okay. And I think part of that is, breastfeeding is a huge workout for the body too.
That's so interesting. I have trouble getting straight answers about PCOS out of people, like in general. You know what I mean? Even when you talk to doctors, like, well, we'll see. It's interesting what they don't know.
And, my doctors never gave me a huge straight answer out of it. I had switched during that whole trying to get pregnant thing. I started a new OB, and she said, yeah, if you have irregular periods, you probably do have PCOS. And that's like the most I ever got out of it. Like they never ultrasounded me to see, like, okay, how many cysts does she have on her ovaries or anything like that. They just said, yeah, you probably do. And that was it. Like there was no real support for that. They did have me try Clomid a few times. Mm-hmm. To try and get pregnant and kind of force an ovulation.
Sorry about that. I'm not sure what happened there. You said they asked you to use Clomid and then I lost you.
Oh, yeah. So the Clomid is to like force an ovulation because if you're not getting a period, you're not ovulating. That's why you can't get pregnant with PCOS half the time.
Gotcha. Wow.
Yeah.
I just know that it's frustrating to hear doctors go, oh, that's probably that. Okay, see ya. Like, wait, what?
Right.
There's no more? You don't have other thoughts or ideas or no? Just like, that's tough luck. See you later, kid.
Yeah, and that's pretty much how it was. And the other thing that really bugs me is when I had that miscarriage from the Clomid pregnancy, I had asked my old OB about my progesterone levels because I had read that, sometimes you can't maintain a pregnancy because your progesterone you don't produce enough progesterone, which, with PCOS and hormone imbalances. And she said, progesterone only helps you get pregnant. It doesn't matter after you get pregnant. Guess what my OB did right after I got pregnant? Mm-hmm. She tests my progesterone to make sure that it's high enough to maintain a pregnancy.
Nothing like getting completely conflicting information from places you just don't think should be confused about what they're saying.
Not at all. Yeah. It just, I already kind of knew I was right to leave my old OB, but that definitely firmed that up for me.
I hope that's comforting to people who think like, oh, my endo doesn't know what they're talking about. At this point, it's hard to get, I've spoken to people and I've learned that it's hard to get good care for your thyroid condition. It's hard to get good care for your hormonal problems. It's hard to get good care for your diet. I think it's just hard to get good care.
Yes.
I think people need to stop thinking that doctors are specifically not good at one certain thing. And maybe it's time to realize that we're only 100 or so years into modern medicine to begin with, and we don't really know a lot about a lot still. The
interesting thing I've found around here is, so within a 25-minute drive, I have like 4 different health systems I could go to. Mm-hmm. And, we're not like a metropolitan area by any means. So, we have a lot of healthcare options. Like the one that's closest to me, it's really hit or miss on doctors. If I go to the one where I send Cora, much better chances that you're going to get a good doctor. And then for Cora's like specialty stuff, we send her to the nearest big city because there's like a guaranteed chance at that children's hospital she's going to get a good doctor.
Interesting. Yeah.
It's kind of like this whole little like range of, okay, where do you go for what you need?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a game you almost have to play. And how do you know how to play that game even? And how much wasted time is there when you see doctors who aren't helpful at all and then just say things to you at the end like, hey, you might have PCOS. See you later. I'm like, oh, great.
Right.
Thanks a lot.
I feel like that's a huge benefit, having a type 1 kid in my 30s, because if I was like 19, 20 having a kid and then all of a sudden she has type 1, I wouldn't know what the heck to do.
Yeah.
I feel like I at least have a little bit of life experience to like gauge those situations.
Yes, you don't just take the first thing someone says to you and go, well, that must be true. And now we're done. And,
Exactly.
and then when it doesn't work, go, oh, diabetes. It's just confusing, right? It's just, it's one of the things that had bothered me constantly through this whole thing and probably led in some way to the podcast is the idea of like, I don't understand why when people get information, it seems conflicting and they just nod their head and go along with it. Like it just never made any sense to me. So,
yeah. It's the whole questioning doctors thing. Yeah. That's another big thing that took a long time for me to get my head around is the whole, insulin isn't a, something like take as prescribed, that whole, figure it out, making your own adjustments thing. Like you don't have to call your doctor and get permission.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Count carbs, give insulin. If that works, good. If it doesn't, that's just diabetes. We'll try again at the next meal. Like, great. That's what we're going to do. We're not going to put any effort into this whatsoever to figure this out.
Right. Yeah.
Fascinating, really. Julia, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you wanted to?
I guess the only thing is like the end of her honeymoon. So after she got the celiac diagnosis, it seemed like, it was kind of starting to come to an end. Mm-hmm. But then she also, when she started the pods, which, is going to be a little bit of an adjustment, but she also started to get chronic ear infections. So we had like 2 months where she would have like back-to-back ear infections and the antibiotics wouldn't take them away. And she's also got the pile on of her body is now digesting her food and all of that. And, we're also trying to figure out a new system, which was pretty minimal adjustment in the scheme of things. But that's what really seemed to mostly kill her pancreas is like all of a sudden she needs so much more insulin for these infections and the food and everything else. That honestly, we're a year and a half in, and some days she goes down to that 0.05 basal rate. And I don't know if it's still her pancreas like producing a little bit or what, but it's just like we're not having a really clear-cut time with the honeymoon on everything. But she got ear tubes now, and that was like the best thing we could have done because now she doesn't have like an infection every other week. Mm-hmm.
Her ears are draining better now and not getting clogged up and all that stuff. Okay. Did they give you any ideas? There's something about the formation of her ear canals, or did they talk about it at all?
Not really. They said she probably has big adenoids, but they try to do the ear tubes first before they, do the more invasive taking out the adenoids. So they think that's probably why, because she apparently has big tonsils too.
Okay.
And that can usually mean big adenoids.
Interesting. And that causes kind of a blockage and your ears don't drain correctly and you get infections.
Yeah. Yeah. But actually, since you had mentioned the autoimmune thing with gestational diabetes, I also wanted to mention, like on a somewhat unrelated note, but an interesting tidbit. So when you have a baby with gestational diabetes, they track its blood sugar for a few hours after birth. And apparently normal range for an infant is 50 to 92. So I was looking on Cora's charts to, check a couple of her numbers because I really wasn't sure where she had started out with some of those numbers. Mm-hmm. And I thought the blood tests I was seeing were from diagnosis, but apparently they were from birth. And like her first one after she was born was 43. And they were checking every couple hours. And the lowest one she had was 24. And then once they finally got her up over 51, like they just stopped checking.
No kidding.
Yeah. Isn't that bizarre though? 24 for a newborn.
But did they give you any reasoning behind it? Did you ever ask?
So what they said is, with the gestational that, sometimes kids have a little hypoglycemia, but they also said, more skin to skin, that kind of stuff. Well, I had a 36-hour labor and then birthed her at 8 p.m. Like, I wasn't holding her too much doing skin to skin. Like I was going to go to sleep.
Right.
So that was part of it. But really what helped was they put her in the little baby tanning bed, under the UV lights.
Yeah.
And that's what really kind of ended up bringing her sugar up.
Interesting. Wow.
Yeah.
Just some time too. I don't know. She's an interesting and intricate story, especially in such a short amount of time.
Yeah. She's definitely kept me on my toes. And by the way, so with all of this madness going on, her last A1C is 6.9 and her 2-week GMI is 6.4.
Good for you.
So like you guys, you've really helped a lot with the whole figuring this stuff out. And even though it seems like I should be afraid to give her insulin because of everything that had went on, we were really able to maintain somewhat decent numbers throughout that.
No, I mean, I think just your focus on limiting the very high highs and understanding that at the moment, it doesn't seem like you can stop these drops from occurring, but you can stop them from being dangerous. I think that's what's keeping you in the sixes. It sounds like.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, now she needs a lot more insulin. So it's a little bit of a different game than it was. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, she was around 7 for most of her honeymoon.
Wow. You're a good mom, Julia.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. No, that's what I keep thinking while we're talking. Like this is a lot and you seem like you're doing really well with it. So I'm going to ask, are you doing well or are you okay?
I'm pretty okay. I'm a little bit of an anxious person anyway, like not to a horrible extent, but if you try for so long to have a baby and you have struggles having a baby, the whole idea of keeping your baby alive after you have that baby is a pretty strong feeling. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I've always kind of had that. So hypervigilance when it comes to Cora came before the type 1.
Okay.
So it's one of those, like, I'll never turn that side off and just relax to a degree. But I think in general, I'm doing okay. Yeah. Like I go in spurts where it gets to be a little bit too much, but I mean, I have a toddler with type 1, like it's going to be too much sometimes.
Yeah, no, I agree. Is her name Cora or is it Coraline?
Cora.
It's really pretty.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. All right. Well, I appreciate you sharing this with me. Did it help talking about it? Like, did you feel good about the fact that you came on and did this? I always wonder why people want to come on. Like for clarity, I'll pull up my calendar. Okay. Today is Thursday. And if I count forward, let's just do 2 weeks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I'm recording 10 times in the next 14 days.
Wow.
So yeah. There are times where if I just get out of this month, I'm just packed. Like I'll do at least 15 recordings a month, and then I keep my Fridays and Mondays open to do editing, and they end up getting filled with like, interviews that pop up at the last minute. Like I did,
sure.
Dexcom, excuse me, hold on a second. I apologize. Or Jenny will be like, hey, I can work on Friday and we'll come in and do it, stuff like that. So I record 15 to 20 times a month. And I'm always like, just grateful that people want to tell their stories, but I never understand completely why they do.
Well, for me, so whenever I would ask a honeymoon question or I would see other people ask honeymoon questions online, people would just be like, oh yeah, that honeymoon, that's a real and so I it was always kind of frustrated. Like there's not a lot of helpful information. It's just like, oh, well, maybe you should just run your kid high so they don't fall. And I don't know, I just wanted to share her story because it's such a unique one that, maybe it could help someone because let's face it, she got a lot of stuff going on and,
Yeah. I'm glad. I'm thrilled that you did. Like, I really am. I always wonder, like, what makes people want to, I don't ask very much, but,
sure.
Yeah, I just thought it was interesting for you to ask. I thank you very much. I can't thank you enough for doing this, really.
Oh, well, I'm glad because it sounds like you think it's a good show. So I'm glad about that.
Oh, Julia, they're all good. I'm incredibly good at this.
I know you are, but there's always that little bit of insecurity, like, ooh, is mine going to be just boring?
No, you remember at the beginning before we were recording, you said, I wasn't sure if I should come on like really prepared with what to say or not. But do you see that if you would have just stuck to a list, we don't even get to your PCOS.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
And yeah, that is one like people don't talk about because there's a lot of ugly side effects to that too, like facial hair, for instance. Like I still have to go get lasered. Yeah. Even after having had laser done before.
Right. Yeah. No, and yeah, people don't want to share that stuff because they think of it as embarrassing. I'm assuming, but the point is that everyone else listening, they need to hear you say, I have PCOS. They need to hear you say, they need to hear me say, Arden's trying not to eat gluten for a month to see what happens. Like, because it's the only way you figure this stuff out, because it doesn't come up in doctor's offices. Most of the things that we've tried for Arden throughout the years for, any number of things, or thyroid or diabetes or any other problems, are from us. Like, it's us going into a doctor's office and saying, what do you think about us trying this? And they go, yeah, it's worth it. But if you don't mention it going in, you don't come out with that. They don't say, oh, you know what you should do? You should try this. They just, I don't know it's not doctors, Julia. I'm not saying it's doctors. There's something about the way it works. It's not completely right. Do you know what I mean by that? Like, there's something about the way we see physicians and the time we spend together, or the lack of time that they spend together. There's something not right about it. You shouldn't know more about a thing that you can't understand than the person who has a chance of understanding it. And yet that happens over and over and over again. So I think these conversations are the best way to plant seeds in people's heads. And hopefully they'll run into a doctor's office one day and go, you know what? I need a scope to see if I have celiac, or I need you to do a test to see if I have PCOS, or, whatever. Because people shouldn't say things to each other like, well, that's crazy. See ya.
Right. Yeah. And honestly, that's so much of the approach with honeymoon too.
Oh, sure.
It's just like, oh yeah, that's crazy.
Get through it.
No suggestions. Thanks.
Yeah. Julia, I think if you and Cora can stay alive long enough, this will end. Well, thank you. Wonderful.
Yes, exactly.
No more to it than that. You don't have any suggestions whatsoever. Even just hearing you talk about the way the digestion changed after going off of gluten, I imagine just that sentence will help somebody. So I love these conversations being conversational and not being bullet pointed, because you don't know, even though it's your story, if you knew all the parts about it that were important for me to hear, you would have figured out things already that you haven't figured out yet. And so I think they just need to be spoken about out loud so that you can really hear it. I think it'll help you having said it out loud.
I hope so.
So yeah, I think it will. So, all right. Well, thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, Scott. Have a good day.
Well, a huge thanks to Julie, of course, for coming on and sharing that great story and having this chat with me. I also want to thank Dexcom, makers of the Dexcom G6 continuous glucose monitor, and remind you to go to dexcom.com/juicebox to see if you're eligible for that free 10-day trial of the Dexcom G6. And if you're interested in the Omnipod 5 or the Omnipod DASH, you want omnipod.com/juicebox. Links in the show notes, links at juiceboxpodcast.com. When you click on my links or type them into a browser, you're supporting the production of the Juicebox Podcast and keeping the show free and plentiful. Listen, everybody, I usually just say at the end something like, what do I usually say? I go, thanks so much for listening. I'll be back soon. I do that whole thing. But every once in a while, I don't want to just like blurt out a sentence. I want to tell you about how amazing it is that you listen to the podcast and tell you why. I'm going to give you a couple of numbers here. It's going to kind of freak you out a little bit. I'm going to find these numbers for you. I should have found them before I started talking. I know, but I didn't. So anyway, this year, the podcast will have something like 5 million downloads. That's a pretty accurate number. It's astounding to me. I'm not going to lie to you. I think the first year the podcast had 25,000 downloads. 25,000, like in the whole year. And now 5 million. And next year, if trends continue, I mean, it could be twice that. And the reason I'm sharing this with you is because it's up to you, right? And it's because of you. Podcasts don't become popular because they're good or because they're valuable, as crazy as that sounds. I mean, I think that's why people share them, but it doesn't just magically happen. They grow and find other people solely based on word of mouth, and that's why I'm taking a moment here to thank you. It's a lot of downloads for a year, especially for a podcast that's in such a specific niche like this one is. So thank you very much for listening, for sharing, and for supporting the sponsors. I genuinely enjoy making this show. I love that it helps people, and I can't believe that it helps my family pay my bills. When I look back on my life, I just never thought I'd have a job like this. And the truth is, I wouldn't if it wasn't for you. So thank you so much for listening. I'll be back very soon with another episode of the Juicebox Podcast. Small child, diluted insulin, honeymooning. Mom has PCOS. Kid also has celiac.